it comes down again, where Ethereum really becomes valuable again is when the applications are there. Because if you think about it, there's no deflation if there's no applications use. Because 1559, it requires applications, and just buying Ethereum from somebody doesn't generate any of that. Obviously, it's great to go proof of stake and proof of work, right? For all the environmental reasons. Then with 1559, you're going to potentially have deflation, right? So that brings up an interesting corollary: inflation versus utilization. Because as utilization goes up and the value of a token goes up, then the cost to do something goes up. And so you have these two competing interests. Hey, I want to create an app that generates 1 million NFTs a day, right? Just picking something out of left field, right? I'm not saying there is one. Well, if the value of Ethereum keeps on going up because there's a deflationary spiral going on because of 1559, now all of a sudden, where's the equilibrium? And then there's the question of all the stakers with staking, right? With, now it's staged on when they can get out, but will they? And how quickly? And what happens to the stake along that period of time, and what does that do for the pricing? So there's a lot of uncertainty, and you're seeing a lot of people speculating by buying call options, right? The option rate versus Bitcoin is through the roof. So it remains to be seen, but it's hard. It's going to be really hard to determine, right? And so, and I don't. Maybe you guys know the answer. Will gas calculations change? Under proof of stake, right, versus what they were under proof of work to even out, so that I have some level of consistency on what my expectations are for being an NFT business, or whatever business, DeFi, whatever it may be that I'm trying to do. Do you guys know what happens to gas fees at that point in time, or is it still pretty much the same formula?
I'm not exactly sure. I know that the misinformation is that gas fees are going to go down, but that's not really going to happen until more layer twos and different things are added. But as far as like evening out and being more stable, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because you see what I'm saying, right? If all of a sudden the price goes through the roof, like you saw that before, when you talk about high gas fees, it's a function of the price of Ethereum.
Totally. So it sounds to me like you think the merge is a good move, but it might be a sell the news event.
It might be a what event?
A sell the news event.
That I don't know. I don't know. It comes down again, where Ethereum really becomes valuable again is when the applications are there. Because if you think about it, there's no deflation if there's no applications use. Because 1559, it requires applications, and just buying Ethereum from somebody doesn't generate any of that.
So, yeah. So let's say if successful, where do you see Ethereum as this global computer, like in 10 years, versus with the Googles and with the Amazons taking over, working beside?
Depends on the applications. If there's a better search engine that's on Ethereum, whoever creates it gets it. The token side is all noise. The price of tokens are noise. That has nothing to do with the foundational value of crypto. Put aside Bitcoin. Bitcoin's store of value, right? You can argue about Lightning and all this stuff the maxis argue, but it's not really an extensible platform. It's not extensible enough to build applications on yet. Which is a whole other question. If you can, if you're willing to change it, that creates all kinds of other questions about Bitcoin and what the maxis think. But I think what really comes to play for me is the idea of distributed applications driven by smart contracts. So I mentioned being able to use, to create carbon offsets. So the question, somebody like Bill would come back and say is, well, why do I need tokens? Why does that matter, right? Why don't I just create something that's easy to buy, a certificate? Well, the difference is the standards that are in place, so that royalties or storage or exploring, those things aren't necessarily available through traditional database applications. I mean, I spent 8 years, my first company, that's all I wrote was, distributed database applications. And so I think there's a huge advantage there. I think DAOs also have a unique opportunity, not so much because everybody gets to vote, but more because it forces organizations to structure themselves differently. An organization that is vertical is always going to have a hard time fighting through overcoming its hierarchy. Whereas a DAO is vertical at some levels, but it's still smushed vertical, right? So that the people who start the DAO control everything, no matter how much you want to lie to yourself about how open-ended it is, right? But at the same time, as it starts to evolve and new things come in, there's a voice to the token holders that isn't available in a traditional organization, and there's not the standard hierarchy, if it's done right, that is typical to an organization. And so getting rid of that hierarchy that traditional corporations have is a huge step forward for a lot of different types of companies. And then I think there's different ways to use crypto in applications that the distribution can play a major part. So if you look at insurance claims, medical insurance claims, right? And so if you were to create an environment where you have, what's the right word? 10,000 hosts, not hosts, but
nodes.
Nodes, yeah. So I have 10,000 nodes and I train them, right? So you have to put up X number of tokens worth 10,000 or 20,000, something very material, right? Where not anybody is going to be able to do it. And you have to go through this training before you're able to do this, where you have to learn all the rules for approving or disapproving a medical claim. And for some, it might be after the fact. For others, it might be pre-approval. And there's 10,000 of those nodes that have been trained, and you use an optimistic rollup, right? Where you also have nodes that question. You can go in there and question whether or not something is whether a claim was denied fairly or not fairly, or whether somebody's trying to scam the system, like you see in insurance all the time. And if the node in the rollup is calls into question another node, whoever's right gets the stake from the other one. And so that's a unique approach to dealing with something like insurance claims that I think has merit. And you can do that as a DAO, you can do that as a traditional, however you want to approach it. But those are the types of things that if I were to try to just start an insurance company right now, particularly given the amount of money involved, it almost has to be a vertical organization like we see now. And we see what happens as a result, where they do everything possible to deny claims as opposed to do it. And if you made the actual insurance contracts, depending on what it was, smart contracts with extensions that'll need to come for the actual legalese, because somebody's going to sue somebody over it. So we'll start to see some extensions to smart contracts that leap over into the real world legal constructs, if you will. Those are the types of things that are game changers. Not cheap to do, not easy to do, not something you can do in 6 months or 1 year or 5 years. It's the type of project that'll take you 5 or 10 years to really get right. But when it happens, it's an insane game changer. The beauty of crypto is that it can make a business better. It creates new opportunities to run a business, and that's a beautiful thing. It globalizes in a way that is not easy to do with traditional business and so many other things. But there has to be a business there. There has to be utility. And don't let yourself get sucked in based off of the value of tokens and what direction they go up or down. Look at the utility and the value to you as a consumer, as a person, however you want to look at it. And where you see value, that's probably a good place to look to invest. And where you find yourself using the tokens, actually using them for something in your life, that's probably the best way. There's this old school guy named Peter Lynch, and he used to give advice on investing. And he would say, well, the way to figure out what you should look at investing is to look at what you buy and use. When you go to the mall, when you go to the store, is there one product you love and can't live without, that you use every minute of every day in your life? That's a product you should probably look at the company and see if you might want to invest. Crypto is the exact same thing. If all you're doing is looking at it and saying, go up, please, when go up, when go up, when go up, right? And you find yourself all caught up in crypto speak, you're fucked, right? If you find yourself using this and thinking, oh my God, this has changed my life, I really need this. Just think back to your first, phone, think back to using certain applications. That's how, I make determinations on what crypto I invest in. Is there an application or applications that I think are game-changing, world-changing? Those are the tokens I want to own because I use them.